Have you ever wondered what it would be like to choose love over duty? To abandon everything you know for the promise of something real and true? Throughout history, hearts have defied expectations, breaking free from the gilded cages that society built around them. The story I bring to you today explores what happens when a princess discovers that true nobility lies not in titles, but in the courage to follow one's heart through the harshest winter. In the kingdom of Alvarez, where stone walls whisper ancient secrets and power games determine fates, a forbidden connection blooms between a runaway princess and a woodcutter with a wounded past. Their paths should never have crossed, yet destiny weaves strange patterns in the tapestry of time. This tale of unexpected love challenges everything they believed about themselves and the world that shaped them. Would you risk everything, your future, your duty, your very identity for a chance at genuine love? Have you ever felt trapped by expectations, yearning to discover who you truly are beyond the roles assigned to you? If these questions stir something within your soul, I invite you to share in the comments below a time when you faced a difficult choice between what was expected of you and what your heart truly desired. Your story matters, and in sharing, we create a community of those who understand the courage it takes to follow one's heart. Now, let us journey together to the snow-covered forests of Alvarez, where our story begins. The kingdom of Alvarez had not seen such bitter cold in living memory. Frost etched delicate patterns across castle windows, and the great lake had frozen solid enough for villagers to cross on foot. Yet the chill that crept through the royal palace that winter came not merely from the weather, but from the tension that filled its ancient halls. Princess Elena stood motionless before her chamber window, watching snowflakes dance in the night air, each one as unique and fleeting as the moments of freedom left to her. Her ladies-in-waiting bustled around the room, preparing gowns and jewels for the morning ceremony that would bind her forever to Duke Alaric of Dunmere, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was surpassed only by his wealth. Their alliance would strengthen Alvarez against northern threats, secure vital trade routes, and end years of border skirmishes. A perfect political match, her father had declared. The fact that she had never met this man was considered irrelevant. The princess traced her finger along the frosted glass, creating a small clear path through which she could glimpse the darkened forest. Beyond the castle walls, her heart ached with a longing she could scarcely name. Was it merely fear of the unknown that made her chest tighten, or something deeper, a premonition that the path laid before her would lead only to a gilded cage, with bars stronger than steel? The oldest of her ladies approached with a cup of mulled wine infused with herbs to help her sleep. The princess noticed how the woman avoided meeting her gaze. They all knew she was being sacrificed for the good of the realm. Some perhaps pitied her, but none would dare speak against the king's decree. Elena accepted the cup with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. When her chamber finally emptied and the heavy door closed behind the last servant, Elena moved swiftly to the small trunk hidden beneath her bed. Inside lay simple garments she had gradually collected over months: a rough woolen cloak, sturdy boots, plain dresses that would not mark her as nobility. Her fingers trembled as she changed, trading silk for wool, casting aside her royal identity with each garment. The weight of her decision pressed upon her like a physical force. To flee meant betraying her family, her duty, her kingdom. To stay meant betraying herself. The princess just Elena now secured a small pouch of coins and a dagger at her waist. She pulled the hood of the cloak low over her face and moved toward the servants' passage she had discovered during childhood explorations. The secret tunnel would lead her beyond the inner walls to the edge of the royal gardens, where the forest began. From there, she would have to trust her instincts and whatever fate awaited her. As the hidden door closed behind her, she whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening that her absence would not bring war upon her people. Her father would be furious, the duke insulted beyond measure, but perhaps they would simply find another noble daughter to seal their alliance. Surely the kingdom would survive without her. Surely her worth as a political token was not so great as to justify hunting her down. She was wrong. By dawn, the castle erupted into chaos. The princess's empty bed, the missing clothing, the unguarded postern gate all pointed to a deliberate escape rather than abduction. King Aldrich's rage echoed through the great hall as he ordered guards to search every corner of the kingdom. The Duke of Dunmere's envoys, already present for the ceremony, watched with cold eyes that promised retribution. But it was Lord Cedric, the king's nephew, who spoke the words that would change everything. He knelt before the throne, his handsome features ranged in an expression of grave concern. The king's most trusted advisor knew how to play his part. His words fell like poison into willing ears. Your Majesty, the princess has long been known to favor certain companions among the common folk. Perhaps her disappearance is not merely a rejection of her duty, but evidence of a deeper betrayal. If she has fled with a lover, the insult to Duke Alaric cannot be mended with apologies. The court fell silent, courtiers exchanging meaningful glances. The seed was planted. Lord Cedric rose, satisfaction hidden behind concerned eyes. As third in line to the throne after the king and princess, every step that distanced Elenya from the crown brought him closer to his ambition. While intrigue bloomed in the palace, Elenya struggled through the snow-covered forest. She had not anticipated the depth of the drifts or the biting wind that cut through her cloak. Like a knife, her soft hands, unused to labor, were raw and bleeding from pushing through ice-laden branches. The cold seeped into her bones, each breath painful in her chest. The forest, which had seemed to promise freedom, now threatened to become her tomb. Night was falling again, bringing with it a temperature that would surely kill her if she found no shelter. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, her mind growing cloudy. Just as despair began to overwhelm her, she glimpsed a faint glow between the trees' firelight, steady and warm. With the last of her strength, she pushed forward. The small cabin sat nestled among ancient pines, smoke curling from its chimney into the darkening sky. Elenya collapsed against the rough wooden door, her frozen hand barely able to form a fist to knock. The sound was feeble, but it was enough. The door swung open, and she tumbled forward into warmth and the scent of wood smoke. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. Through the haze of cold and exhaustion, she saw a face stern and weathered, with eyes the color of the forest after rain. A long scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, giving him a fearsome appearance that contrasted with the gentleness of his grip. As he helped her to a chair by the fire, he spoke not a word as he removed her frozen cloak and wrapped a fur around her shoulders. He pressed a cup of something hot into her hands, guiding it to her lips when she proved too weak to lift it herself. The liquid burned down her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. Only when color began to return to her cheeks did he speak. His voice was deep and rough, like stones tumbling in a mountain stream. What madness brings a woman alone into these woods during the dead of winter? Elenya hesitated. What could she tell this stranger? That she was the princess who had abandoned her kingdom on the eve of her wedding. That she had chosen the uncertainty of death in the forest over the certainty of a life without freedom? I seek a new beginning, she said simply. The old path was no longer mine to walk. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her smooth hands, her fine features, her manner of speech that betrayed noble upbringing despite her common garments. I am Kale, he said finally, and I know what it means to seek a new path. Rest now. Questions can wait until morning. As Elenya drifted into exhausted sleep by the fire, she could not know that her rescuer carried his own burden of secrets, or that his history was intertwined with her own in ways neither could imagine. Kale watched the mysterious woman sleep, wondering what demons had driven her into the killing cold, and why her presence stirred memories he had long tried to bury. He touched the scar on his face, a reminder of the day royal guards had dragged his father from their home, accused of treason against the crown. The day everything he believed about justice and honor had shattered like ice beneath a hammer blow. His father, a respected huntsman who had once served the royal family, had died protesting his innocence. Kale had been but 16 summers old, forced to watch the execution, marked with the scar when he tried to intervene. Now, 7 years later, he lived in isolation, cutting himself off from a kingdom he could no longer trust. Yet something about the sleeping stranger compelled him to offer shelter, rather than turning her away. Perhaps it was the desperation in her eyes, or perhaps merely the knowledge that to send her back into the cold would be a death sentence. Whatever her secrets, they would keep until dawn. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Elenya woke to find Kale already at work, skinning rabbits caught in his traps. She watched him silently, noting the efficiency of his movements, the quiet strength in his shoulders, the wariness that never quite left his eyes even in the safety of his own home. He spoke without turning. There is water in the basin if you wish to wash, and bread on the table. Not the fare you're accustomed to, I'd wager, but it will keep you alive. How do you know what I'm accustomed to? Elenya asked, suddenly alert to the danger of discovery. Now he did turn, his expression unreadable. Your hands have never known real work. Your speech betrays education. You're noble-born, running from something or someone. I need not know more than that. Relief washed through her. He might suspect her station, but not her identity. And you? What brought you to this solitude? A muscle tightened in his jaw. The kingdom of Alderus has little love for truth or justice. I found I preferred the company of trees to that of liars and murderers who wear crowns. His bitterness struck Elenya like a physical blow. Was this how her family was seen by the common people? As liars and murderers? She had been raised to believe in the nobility's divine right to rule, in their responsibility to protect and guide their subjects. Had it all been a lie? The king's guards took my father, Cale continued, focusing again on his task, his knife flashing in the morning light. They said he plotted against the crown, a man who taught me that loyalty was the highest virtue, who served in the royal hunt for 20 years. They executed him while the court watched and did nothing. Elenya's throat tightened. When? She managed to ask. 7 years passed. During the summer solstice festival, the king made a spectacle of it. She remembered that day. She had been 13, confined to her chambers with a summer fever. Later, she had heard whispers of a traitor's execution, but such matters were kept from her, considered unsuitable for a young princess's ears. Had her father truly ordered the death of an innocent man? Or had Lord Cedric, already her father's trusted advisor, played some role in the condemnation? I'm sorry, she whispered, the words wholly inadequate. Cale's eyes flashed. Your sympathy changes nothing, my lady. The dead remain dead, and the guilty remain unpunished. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Elenya rose and moved to the basin, splashing cold water on her face. She had fled the palace seeking freedom, only to find herself face to face with the consequences of her family's rule. The weight of responsibility she had tried to escape seemed to have followed her into the wilderness. Have you shared your story with others? Surely if an innocent man was condemned, there would be those willing to seek justice, she ventured. Cale gave a bitter laugh. For justice? In Alderus I tried. For 3 years, I petitioned nobles, magistrates, even attempted to reach the king himself. Some ignored me. Others threatened worse than exile if I continued spreading treasonous lies. One lord suggested my father's guilt must have passed to his son. I learned that power protects power, and the truth matters little against a king's decree. The rabbits prepared. He set them to cook over the fire. The scent of roasting meat filled the small cabin, reminding Elenya that she had not eaten since fleeing the palace. Despite the tension between them, her stomach growled loudly enough for Cale to hear. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Eat first, he said, his tone softening slightly. Then we can decide what to do with you. They shared the meal in silence, but it was a different quality of silence, now less hostile, more contemplative. Elenya savored flavors more vivid than any palace feast. Simple food, honestly prepared. Like the man himself, she thought, stealing glances at her rescuer. After they had eaten, Cale surprised her by asking, "Can you sew?" She nodded. It was one of the few practical skills deemed necessary for a princess to master. Good. He gestured to a pile of torn garments. I have little patience for needlework. Make yourself useful while you shelter here. Is that what I'm doing? Sheltering here? Elenya asked carefully. Cale studied her, his expression guarded. Unless you prefer to continue your journey immediately, though I wouldn't recommend it. There's another storm coming. As if to confirm his words, wind rattled the shutters, carrying the promise of more snow. Elenya looked at the needle and thread he had laid out, then back to his face. The scar looked less fearsome in the gentle light of the fire, and she found herself wondering what kind of man he might have become without that mark of tragedy. I would be grateful for your hospitality, she said softly, and I can earn my keep. I'm stronger than I look. For the first time, something like genuine amusement crossed his features. We shall see, my lady. We shall see. Days passed, melting into weeks as winter tightened its grip on the forest. The promised storm became many storms, making travel impossible even had Elenya wished to leave. She found herself settling into a routine alongside Cale, mending clothes, preparing meals, learning to tend the fire properly. He taught her to set snares for rabbits, to identify which plants could be gathered even in winter's grip, to split wood without injuring herself. Her soft hands grew calloused, her arms stronger. In turn, she surprised him with her quick mind and willingness to learn. She never complained, not even when the cold seeped through the cabin walls and they had to sleep close to the fire to keep from freezing. She told him stories in the evenings, tales she claimed to have heard from traveling bards, though many were in fact stories her father had told her as a child. She was careful never to reveal too much about herself, creating a past as the daughter of a minor lord, fleeing an unwanted marriage. Kale rarely spoke of himself, but gradually, the wall between them lowered. She learned that he had a gift for carving small animals, and figures emerged from blocks of wood. Under his skilled hands, she discovered his unexpected kindness when he brought home an injured fox kit and nursed it back to health before releasing it. Most surprising was his knowledge of herbler and healing, skills he'd learned from his mother before illness claimed her when he was young. What Elenya could not see was how her presence was changing him. The bitterness that had been his companion for 7 years began to loosen its grip on his heart. Her questions made him remember who he had been before tragedy struck, a young man who loved the forest, who laughed easily, who believed in possibilities. "My friends call me Noble," she said to him one evening as they shared the last of the rabbit stew. "I believe I've given you cause to use that word for me as well." He looked at her strangely. "Noble is as noble does," he replied. "Some with the highest titles are the lowest in character, and some with no title at all possess true nobility of spirit." She sensed a compliment hidden within his words and smiled. "And what would you call me, then?" "Surprising," he said after a moment of consideration. "I've never met anyone like you." Their eyes held for a moment too long, and Elenya felt something shift between them, a recognition of connection that went beyond mere companionship born of necessity. She looked away first, suddenly afraid of what she might reveal if she continued to meet his gaze. That night, as they prepared for sleep on opposite sides of the fire as had become their custom, a violent gust of wind tore at the cabin's roof. A section of thatch gave way, allowing snow to pour in directly onto Elenya's sleeping place. With a cry of dismay, she leapt up, already soaked in freezing slush. Kale was beside her in an instant, pulling her away from the breach. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her trembling form, sharing his warmth as he assessed the damage. "We can't repair it until morning," he said, his breath warm against her hair. "You'll have to sleep by me tonight. We'll use both our blankets." She should have protested, maintained the careful distance they had established. Instead, she nodded, too cold and startled to argue. They settled together near the fire, his body curled protectively around hers, their shared blankets creating a cocoon of warmth. Sleep did not come easily to Elenya that night. She was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, his chest against her back, his arm draped over her waist, his breath stirring her hair. She had never been so close to a man before, had never imagined finding comfort rather than fear in such proximity. For Kale, the night brought a different kind of awakening. The woman in his arms had somehow become more than a noble fugitive, more than an unexpected guest. She had become someone whose smile he sought, whose laughter lightened the burden he had carried for so long. This realization troubled him deeply. She belonged to a world that had destroyed his own. Whatever had driven her to the forest, eventually she would return to her life of privilege, a life built upon the suffering of people, like his father. Yet as dawn approached and they both finally drifted into sleep, their bodies naturally seeking closer contact against the cold, neither could deny the bond that had formed between them, a bond as unexpected as it was undeniable. The next morning brought clear skies and an awkward distance as both pretended the night had changed nothing. Kale repaired the roof while Elenya ventured out to check the snares. She returned triumphant with 2 rabbits, her cheeks flushed with cold and accomplishment. "You're learning," he acknowledged, something like pride in his voice. "I had a good teacher," she replied, holding his gaze steadily. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then a sound from the forest edge shattered their fragile peace, hoofbeats approaching through the snow. Kel's expression hardened instantly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Hide," he commanded in a whisper. "Now." Elenya hesitated only briefly before ducking into the root cellar beneath the cabin floor. Through gaps in the wooden slats, she watched as Kale composed himself, adopting a posture of casual disinterest as he continued skinning the rabbits she had brought. The rider who emerged from the trees was unexpected, a woman, clad in armor that marked her as a mercenary rather than a royal guard. Her dark hair was braided tightly against her skull, and a scar crossed her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. She dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years of training. "Kale," the woman called, her voice carrying a hint of an accent from the eastern provinces. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough, Lyra," he replied coldly. "What brings you to my door?" "Last I heard, you were collecting coin from nobles for doing their dirty work." She smiled, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Information travels, old friend. Word has reached even my ears that you might be harboring a fugitive, a noblewoman of considerable value, to certain interested parties." Elenia's blood ran cold. How could anyone have tracked her here? The forest had been impassable for weeks due to the storms. Kel's expression remained impassive. I live alone, as you can see. Perhaps your information is as unreliable as your loyalty. Lyra laughed, the sound sharp in the winter air. Always so direct. It's what I liked about you. Before you chose exile over opportunity. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Listen carefully. The Princess of Alderus has vanished. Her cousin, Lord Cedric, offers gold beyond imagining for her return, dead or alive. Elenia stifled a gasp. Dead or alive? Her own cousin wished her death? I care nothing for royal games, Kale said. Or have you forgotten who put my father in the ground? I haven't forgotten, Lyra replied, her tone softening slightly. But I also know you, Kale. If a woman appeared at your door in need, you wouldn't turn her away, princess or peasant. She glanced meaningfully at the two sets of footprints leading from the cabin to the forest edge. I'm not here to collect the bounty. I'm here to warn you. Others are searching, and they won't be as understanding as I am. Kel's posture shifted subtly, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet as though preparing for conflict. Why would you warn me? Let's call it payment of an old debt, she said cryptically. The princess fled to escape marriage to Duke Alaric of Dunmere. Do you know what happens to those who displease the Duke? I've heard rumors. They're not rumors. Lyra's hand moved unconsciously to the scar on her neck. I served in his household guard for 3 years. I know what he is capable of. If your guest is who I suspect she might be, death would be kinder than returning her to that match. Kale studied her face, searching for deception. And what do you suggest instead? Lyra reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a rolled parchment. Here are the patrol routes of the search parties. They've been focusing on the southern roads, assuming she would flee toward the border. This forest has been deemed impassable due to the storms, but when the weather clears, they will come. She handed him the map. Get her to the western mountains. There are settlements there beyond Alderus's reach. Kale accepted the parchment without looking at it, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face. And what do you gain from this, Lyra? She mounted her horse in a single fluid motion. Perhaps I simply wish to see Cedric's plans fail for once. Or perhaps I remember what it was like to be a young woman trapped in a fate chosen by powerful men. She gathered her reins. I was never here, Kale, and I never saw any sign of a noble lady hiding in a woodcutter's cabin. With that, she wheeled her mount around and disappeared into the trees, leaving Kale standing in the snow, the map clutched in his hand and conflict written across his features. Elenia emerged from her hiding place once the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. So now you know, she said quietly. I am not merely a nobleman's daughter. I am Elenia, crown princess of Alderus. Kel's expression hardened, the warmth that had begun to show in his eyes over the past weeks vanishing completely. You lied to me. Yes, she admitted. I could not risk revealing my identity even to you, especially to you. Once I learned of your history with my family. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with tension. Do you know what happened to my father? Were you party to his condemnation? I was 13, kept sheltered from court politics, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. I knew nothing of your father's execution until you told me, but that does not absolve me or my family of responsibility. Kale was silent for a long moment, staring into the trees where Lyra had disappeared. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. Your cousin wants you dead. The mercenary may have been lying about that, but I doubt it. Lyra has many faults, but unnecessary deception isn't among them. Cedric has always coveted the throne, Elenia acknowledged. With me gone and my father aging, his path becomes clearer. But I never thought he would go so far as to arrange my death. Kale turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The question now is what to do with this knowledge. And with you, princess. The title felt like a wall erected between them, negating the closeness that had grown during their weeks together. Elenia stepped forward, closing the distance he had created. I am still the same woman who has shared your home, who has learned to set snares and split wood, who has listened to your stories by firelight. My title changes nothing about who I have become here. It changes everything, he countered, though something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or conflict. You will always be the crown princess, heir to the throne that ordered my father's death. You belong to Alderus and its future, not to... He stopped himself, but Elenia heard the unspoken words. Not to me, not to this life. I fled the palace because I refused to be merely a piece in the Game of Thrones, she said fiercely. I wanted the freedom to choose my own path, to know the truth of my kingdom rather than the filtered reality presented within palace walls. She gestured around them, at the small cabin that had become her refuge. These weeks have shown me more about the reality of life in Alderus than 16 years in the palace ever did. Kel's jaw tightened. And what will you do with this knowledge, princess? Return to your castle and order better blankets for the peasants before continuing to tax them into starvation? Command your guards to be gentler when they collect tributes that leave families without food for winter? His bitterness cut her deeply, but she held her ground. I would change things if I could. If I returned, I would. You would be immediately married off to secure your father's alliance, he interrupted harshly. Or worse, silenced permanently by your ambitious cousin. Power doesn't surrender itself willingly, princess, not even for the kindest of intentions. The truth of his words hung between them. Whatever her desires to improve the lives of her people, the constraints of her position would limit her ability to effect real change. She had been raised to believe in her divine right to rule. But what good was such right if it came without the power to truly serve those who needed her most? Before she could formulate a response, Kale sighed, some of the hardness leaving his expression. Night approaches, and with it, colder temperatures. We should continue this discussion inside. The familiar routine of preparing their evening meal provided some comfort, though the easy companionship of previous days had vanished. They moved around each other carefully, avoiding contact, each lost in their own thoughts. As they sat before the fire with their simple meal, Kale finally broke the silence. The mercenaries' warning should not be ignored. Once the weather clears, this forest will be searched thoroughly. You cannot stay here. Elenia nodded slowly. I have put you in danger by my presence. I'm sorry for that. It was my choice to offer shelter, he replied, his tone softer than before. I don't regret it. Their eyes met across the fire, and for a brief moment, the princess glimpsed again the connection that had been growing between them, a connection now complicated by revelations of identity and history. Where will you go, he asked. The Western Mountains, as your friend suggested, Elenia ventured. Though I know nothing of survival in such terrain. Kale studied her thoughtfully. You've learned more than you realize in these weeks. But no, the mountains alone would be a death sentence for someone with your limited experience. Then what alternative remains? Return to the palace and face whatever fate awaits me there? She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. There is another option, Kale said slowly, as though the idea was forming as he spoke. I could accompany you, at least as far as the western settlements. Ensure you reach safety before returning here. Elenia felt a surge of hope at his words. You would do that? Even knowing who I am? I made a promise to myself long ago that I would never again stand idle while injustice was done, he said simply. Whatever my feelings about your family, allowing you to be hunted down by your own cousin would make me complicit in that injustice. It was not a declaration of forgiveness or acceptance of her identity, but it was something, an acknowledgement that the bond between them had not been entirely severed by the truth. Thank you, she said softly. Kale nodded once, then rose to retrieve the map Lyra had left. As he unrolled it on the table, something fell from within the parchment, a small metal object that landed with a dull clink. Kale bent to retrieve it, then went completely still as he examined what lay in his palm. What is it? Elenia asked, moving to his side. In his hand was a medallion bearing a symbol she recognized immediately, the royal crest of Alderus, but with a subtle difference. This was the mark of the Royal Guard commander, a position of highest honor in the kingdom. Where did this come from? Elenia asked, confused. Kel's voice was barely audible when he finally spoke. It was my father's. He served not merely as a huntsman, but as commander of the Royal Guard in his youth, before being accused of treason and executed. His eyes met hers, filled with bewilderment and the first stirrings of a terrible suspicion. Why would Lyra have this? What game is she playing? The medallion gleamed in the firelight, an unexpected link between their separate worlds, whatever its meaning, whatever secrets it held. One thing became clear to both of them. The story of their connection was far from complete, and forces beyond their knowledge were at work in the shadows of Alderus. The realization tied them together more surely than their weeks of shared survival, more intimately than their growing feelings for one another. Princess and woodcutter. They stood at the edge of a mystery that threatened to reshape not only their own fates, but perhaps the very kingdom itself. Pause in our tale, dear viewers. The bond between Princess Elenia and Kale grows deeper, yet more complicated with each revelation. Their journey reminds us that true connections often form when we least expect them. And sometimes with those we're told we should never understand or love. Have you ever discovered unexpected common ground with someone you initially thought was your opposite? Or perhaps you felt that instant recognition of kindred spirit with a stranger? I invite you to share your stories of unexpected connections in the comments below. How did they change your perspective or alter your path? Your experiences create a tapestry of shared wisdom for our community of romantic souls who believe in the power of human connection beyond social boundaries. Now, let us return to our tale of forbidden love and dangerous secrets in the kingdom of Alderus. The royal medallion lay heavy between them, its significance impossible to ignore. Cale turned it over in his palm, revealing an inscription on the back, "Honor and truth above all." His father's personal motto, spoken often during his childhood. The discovery shattered what remained of his carefully constructed isolation. Whatever had led to his father's execution was more complex than he had ever imagined. As spring began to whisper through the forest, melting snow revealed paths long hidden. The time had come to leave the sanctuary of the cabin. Reports from the nearby village, gathered during Kel's cautious trips for supplies, confirmed their fears. Search parties were moving closer, methodically combing the thawing woodlands for any sign of the missing princess. They prepared in tense silence, gathering provisions, studying the map Lyra had provided. The western route would take them through terrain controlled by neither Alderus nor Dunmere, a lawless border region where dangers came not from royal guards but from bandits and the unforgiving wilderness itself. A kingdom girl and a woodcutter against the wild. The odds seemed insurmountable. The night before their departure, Elenia found Cale outside, staring at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. She approached quietly, respecting the wall he had rebuilt between them since learning her identity. "My father always told me each star represents a soul gone to the heavens," she said softly. "I wonder if your father and my mother look down on us now, wondering at the strange twist of fate that brought their children together." Cale did not look at her, but his voice had lost some of its hardness when he replied, "My father said stars are distant suns, and that our world is but one small part of something vastly greater than kings and kingdoms." A small smile touched Elenia's lips. Perhaps they are both right. They stood in companionable silence until Cale finally turned to face her. "If we succeed, if we reach the western settlements, what then, princess? Will you build a new life there? Or will the call of your birthright eventually draw you back?" Elenia considered his question carefully. The weeks in the forest had changed her, stripped away the certainties of her royal upbringing. She was no longer merely the princess in waiting, a political token to be traded for alliances. But neither could she fully escape the responsibility of her birth. "I cannot abandon my people to Cedric's ambition," she said finally. "Not if there is any chance I might someday make their lives better. But first I must survive, gather allies, understand the truth behind these conspiracies." She gestured to the medallion he wore now on a leather cord around his neck. "Starting with the mystery of your father's service and disgrace." Cale studied her face, searching for any sign of deception or political calculation. He found only resolve and a newfound clarity that matched his own determination. Whatever lay between them personally, feelings neither dared yet name. Their paths had become inextricably linked by forces larger than themselves. Dawn had barely broken when they departed, the forest still wrapped in tendrils of mist. They traveled swiftly but cautiously, Cale's knowledge of the land guiding them through hidden paths and natural landmarks. Elenia matched his pace without complaint, her body hardened by months of physical labor in and around the cabin. On the third day, disaster struck. They had just crossed a narrow stream when the sound of horses and men echoed through the trees behind them. A patrol, much closer than they had anticipated. With no time to hide their tracks, they had no choice but to run, abandoning caution for speed. The chase led them to the edge of a steep ravine. Below, a river churned over rocks, swollen with spring meltwater. Behind, the voices of their pursuers grew louder. Cale grabbed Elenia's hand, his eyes conveying what words could not. There was only one way forward. Together, they leapt into the churning waters below. The shock of the icy river drove breath from their lungs. The current seized them, tumbling them downstream like leaves in a storm. Cale fought to keep hold of Elenia's hand, to keep both their heads above water. A fallen tree, stretching halfway across the river, offered their only chance. With the last of his strength, Cale grabbed a branch, hauling them both toward the shore. They collapsed on the muddy bank, gasping, soaked to the bone, but alive. The patrol would assume them drowned, a temporary reprieve, but one that came at a cost. Most of their supplies remained in the packs they had discarded before their desperate jump. Night found them huddled in a small cave, shivering beside a meager fire. Elenia's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, her body racked with violent tremors. Cale did the only thing he could, wrapped his own body around hers, sharing what little warmth he had left. As darkness claimed the forest, he whispered a prayer to whatever gods might listen that they would survive until morning. When Elenia woke, fever burned through her veins. The cold, the exhaustion, the strain of their flight had overwhelmed her body's defenses. For 3 days, Cale nursed her in that cave, foraging for medicinal herbs, hunting what small game he could find, never straying far from her side. He bathed her forehead with cool water from the stream, urged broth between her cracked lips, and spoke to her constantly, his voice an anchor to the world of the living. On the 3rd night, her fever broke. She woke to find Cale slumped beside her, exhaustion finally claiming him after his sleepless vigil. In the dim firelight, she studied his face, softened in slumber. The scar that had once seemed so fearsome to her now appeared simply as part of him, a mark of survival rather than violence. Without fully understanding her own actions, she reached out to touch his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of the old wound. Cale woke instantly, his hand capturing her wrist in a gentle but firm grip. Their eyes met in the flickering light, and something shifted between them, the last barrier crumbling away. "I thought I might lose you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved me," she replied, "in more ways than you know." Neither could later recall who moved first, only that the distance between them vanished. Their lips met in a kiss born of shared danger and growing trust, of nights spent by the same fire and days learning each other's strengths. A kiss that acknowledged what both had tried to deny, that princess and woodcutter, hybrid and common, they had found in each other something rare and precious. When they continued their journey westward, something fundamental had changed. They moved as true partners now, their previous identities, princess and exile, giving way to something new, forged in the crucible of shared survival. Together they faced the challenges of the wilderness. Together they evaded the occasional patrol. Together they planned for the uncertain future that awaited. What neither suspected was that Lyra watched their progress from afar, her loyalties more complex than either could imagine. The mercenary had delivered the medallion not merely as a clue to Cale's past, but as a key to unlock a truth that would shake the foundations of Alderus itself. While Elenia and Cale made their way west, Lord Cedric tightened his grip on the royal court. The king, grief-stricken by his daughter's continued absence, had fallen ill, leaving daily governance in his nephew's capable hands. Rumors circulated that the princess had indeed fled with a lover, further damaging her reputation and strengthening Cedric's position as heir apparent. The court hardly noticed when Cedric ordered a specific prisoner transferred from the deepest cells. Beneath the castle, a woman held for 7 years, whose existence had been all but forgotten. A woman who had once been the wife of the royal guard commander before his execution for treason. Cale's mother, long presumed dead. Elenia and Cale reached the western mountains as summer painted the landscape in vibrant colors. The settlement Lyra had directed them to proved to be more than a simple village. It was a haven for those who had fled the increasingly oppressive rule of Alderus and its neighbors. Former nobles who had fallen from favor, scholars whose ideas challenged royal doctrine, skilled craftspeople seeking freedom from guild restrictions. All had found refuge in this hidden community nestled in a fertile valley between mountain peaks. They were welcomed cautiously, their story heard but not immediately believed. Trust came slowly in a place populated by exiles and fugitives. Yet as weeks passed, Elenia's diplomatic skills and Cale's practical knowledge earned them a place among these diverse refugees. They created a simple life together, sharing a small cottage at the edge of the settlement, their true identities known only to the community's leaders. It was here that Lyra found them again, arriving one autumn evening as golden light bathed the valley. This time she did not come alone. With her rode a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and Cale's green eyes, his mother, Mara, freed from the royal dungeons, where she had been held secretly since her husband's execution. The reunion between mother and son was wordless. An embrace that spoke of years of grief and separation suddenly healed. When they finally drew apart, tears streaked both their faces. Elenia stood apart, allowing them this private moment, until Mara turned to her with knowing eyes. "So you are the princess who stole my son's heart," she said, her voice strong despite her years of captivity. Elenia met her gaze steadily. "I am, though I left that title behind when I fled the palace." Mara studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but blood remains blood. and duty cannot be so easily abandoned. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a sealed document, its edges worn with age, especially when the truth has been buried for so long. The document contained a royal decree, signed and sealed by Elenia's grandfather before his death. It detailed the true bloodline of the royal house, revealing that Kel's father had been not merely a royal guard commander, but the king's legitimate younger brother, deliberately removed from the succession through carefully orchestrated treason charges, which made Kale, by blood, a prince of Alderus and claimant to the very throne that Elenia had fled. The revelation fell between them like a sword, threatening to sever the bond they had forged. Kale stared at the document, his face pale with shock. Elenia felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the world she thought she understood rearranging itself yet again. Why now? Kale demanded of Lyra and his mother. Why reveal this after so many years of silence? Because Cedric knows, Mara replied simply. He discovered the truth in the old king's private archives, and has spent years systematically eliminating anyone who might support your claim. Your father was the first, most direct threat. I was imprisoned to prevent me from spreading the truth, and now he seeks the princess not to return her safely, but to remove the only other legitimate heir who stands between him and the crown. The full scope of Cedric's conspiracy unfolded before them, a patient, decades-long plan to secure the throne by eliminating all rightful claimants. Elenia's flight had been an unexpected opportunity, one he had seized by turning the court against her. With her gone and the king ailing, only Kale remained as a potential threat, a threat Cedric believed eliminated years ago with his father's execution. Lyra spoke then, revealing her own role in the complex web of loyalties and betrayals. She had served Cedric initially, tasked with finding and eliminating Kale should he ever discover his heritage, but her old friendship with the woodcutter had stayed her hand, and the discovery that Mara still lived had turned her loyalties completely. That night, as the settlement slept around them, Elenia and Kale faced their greatest challenge yet. The truth of his bloodline placed them not just on opposite sides of a social divide, but as potential rivals for the same throne. The simple love that had grown between princess and woodcutter now stood entangled in the very power politics they had both sought to escape. Kale, said Elenia softly as they sat before the fire in their cottage, you are not bound by this revelation any more than I was bound by my title. We can still choose our own path. He looked at her, conflict evident in his eyes. Can we? My father died for the truth of my birthright. My mother suffered years of imprisonment. If Cedric's treachery is to be answered, if justice is to be restored to Alderus, can I truly turn away from that responsibility? The question hung between them, unanswerable in the quiet darkness of their exile. By morning, they knew a decision would have to be made. Return to Alderus to confront Cedric and reclaim what was rightfully theirs, or remain in this peaceful valley, choosing love and simplicity over duty and power. The answer came at dawn, not through words but through action. As the first light crested the eastern mountains, Elenia found Kale already dressed, the royal medallion around his neck, his father's sword at his side. But rather than the grim determination she had expected, his face held a serene certainty. I will not claim the throne, he said simply, nor will I ask you to reclaim yours, but neither can we hide while Cedric's poison spreads throughout the kingdom. Relief flooded through Elenia as she realized they had reached the same conclusion independently. There was a third path, neither complete abandonment of duty nor blind acceptance of the roles assigned to them by birth. Together, they would return to Alderus not as rival claimants to power, but as partners in a different vision, to expose Cedric's treachery, to heal the wounds he had inflicted on the kingdom, and then to create something entirely new. Not a return to the old order, but a transformation of what royalty could mean, informed by Kel's understanding of common struggles and Elenia's diplomatic skills. The great hall of Alderus Castle had never seen such a confrontation. The public council where Cedric planned to formalize his claim to the throne became instead the stage for his undoing. Elenia and Kale entered together, flanked by Lyra, Mara, and allies gathered during their careful journey back to the capital. Cedric's face drained of color at the sight of the niece. He had plotted against standing beside the nephew of the king whose existence he had tried to erase. Before the shocked court, Mara presented the royal decree proving Kel's lineage. Lyra testified to Cedric's plots and murders committed in his service. Common folk whom Elenia and Kale had aided during their journey spoke of the princess, who had learned to live among them, and the woodcutter prince who had never forgotten his humble beginnings, despite the revelation of his royal blood. In a final, desperate move, Cedric drew his sword against Kale, declaring him an impostor. The clash of steel rang through the great hall as years of injustice fueled each of Kel's strikes. Yet when the moment came for the killing blow, Kel stayed his hand. The true measure of fitness to rule, he declared to the watching court, lay not in the ability to take life, but in the wisdom to know when to spare it. Cedric, disgraced and defeated, was imprisoned for his crimes rather than executed the first act of a new approach to justice in Eltharis. The ailing king, presented with the truth of his brother's innocence and his nephew's survival, found strength enough to acknowledge Kale before the court. With his blessing, a new future became possible. Yet neither Elenya nor Kale sought the throne for themselves alone. Standing together before the assembled nobles and common folk alike, they proposed a shared rule, a partnership that would unite not only their bloodlines, but the divided perspectives of their kingdom. A rule that would be temporary, lasting only until new systems of governance could be established, giving voice to those who had been silenced for generations. Years later, as the winter snows again blanketed the forests of Eltharis, Elenya and Kale stood on the balcony of a much-changed castle. Below them, the city buzzed with activity schools where once only nobles could learn, councils where commoners spoke with equal voice to lords, markets where fair trade had replaced exploitation. Between them stood their daughter, a child of both bloodlines, her eyes holding the same determination that had brought her parents through exile and return. She would not inherit absolute power as they might once have, but something far more valuable, the freedom to choose her own path, in a kingdom being slowly transformed by love that had defied convention and tragedy. The royal medallion, passed from father to son and now to daughter, caught the winter light. Honor and truth above all, the child read, tracing the inscription with a small finger. Not merely words, but a legacy that had survived execution, exile, and the temptations of power to emerge stronger than ever. Kale drew Elenya close, their journey from princess and woodcutter to partners in both love and purpose complete. The winter that had once threatened to claim her life had instead given birth to a spring none could have foreseen, a spring that promised to bloom far beyond their own lifetimes, in the hearts and minds of all those who learned their story. Asterisk, if this tale of love that transcended boundaries has touched your heart, I invite you to join our community of romantic souls. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us how love can transform not just individuals, but entire kingdoms. Like the unexpected bond between a princess and a woodcutter that changed Eltharis forever, your presence in our community adds a unique thread to the tapestry we weave together. Turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly tales of passion, courage, and hearts that refuse to surrender to convention. Remember that in sharing these stories, we keep alive the timeless truth that love, in all its forms, remains the most powerful force for change in any era. Until our next journey together through the realms of the heart, I bid you farewell with this thought. What impossible boundaries might you break with the courage to follow your own heart's wisdom? Asterisk.